Mr. Bond is in a delicate position, and Le Chiffre is not disposed to mercy. The reader is Alex Jennings.
Le Chiffre was standing in the doorway of a room. He crooked a finger at Bond in a silent, spidery summons. It was a large bare room, sparsely furnished in cheap French Art Nouveau style. Over by the window was an incongruous-looking throne-like chair in carved oak with a red velvet seat, a low table on which stood an empty water carafe and 2 glasses, and a light armchair with a round cane seat and no cushion. Le Chiffre pointed at the cane chair. "That will do excellently," he said to the thin man who had followed Bond into the room. "Prepare him quickly. If he resists, damage him only a little." He turned to Bond. "Take off your clothes. For every effort to resist, Basil will break one of your fingers. We are serious people, and your good health is of no interest to us. Whether you live or die depends on the outcome of the talk we are about to have." He made a gesture towards the thin man and left the room. The thin man's first action was a curious one. He opened the clasp knife he had used on the hood of Bond's car, took the small armchair, and with a swift motion, he cut out its cane seat. Then he turned Bond round to the light and unwound the flex from his wrists. "Vite!" Bond looked him in the eye, and then slowly started to take off his shirt. Le Chiffre came quietly back into the room. He carried a pot of what smelt like coffee. He put it on the small table near the window. He also placed beside it on the table 2 other homely objects, a 3-foot-long carpet beater in twisted cane, and a carving knife. He settled himself comfortably on the throne-like chair and poured some of the coffee into one of the glasses. With one foot, he hooked forward the small armchair, whose seat was now an empty circular frame of wood, until it was directly opposite him. Bond stood stark naked in the middle of the room, bruises showing livid on his white body, his face a grey mask of exhaustion and knowledge of what was to come. "Sit down there." Le Chiffre nodded at the chair in front of him. Bond walked over and sat down. The thin man produced some flex. With this he bound Bond's wrists to the arms of the chair and his ankles to the front legs. He passed a double strand across his chest and through the chair back. He made no mistakes with the knots and left no play in any of the bindings. All of them bit sharply into Bond's flesh. The legs of the chair were broadly spaced, and Bond could not even rock it. He was utterly a prisoner, naked and defenceless. His buttocks and the under part of his body protruded through the seat of the chair towards the floor. Le Chiffre nodded to the thin man, who quietly left the room and closed the door. Then he picked up the cane carpet beater, and resting the handle comfortably on his knee, allowed the flat trefoil base to lie on the floor directly under Bond's chair. He looked Bond carefully, almost caressingly, in the eyes. Then his wrist sprang suddenly upwards on his knee. The result was startling. Bond's whole body arched in an involuntary spasm, his face contracted in a soundless scream, and his lips drew right away from his teeth. For an instant, muscles stood out in knots all over his body, and his toes and fingers clenched until they were quite white. Then his body sagged, and perspiration started to bead all over his body. He uttered a deep groan. Le Chiffre waited for his eyes to open. "You see, dear boy." He smiled a soft, fat smile. "Is the position quite clear now?" A drop of sweat fell off Bond's chin onto his naked chest. "Now, let us get down to business and see how soon we can be finished with this unfortunate mess you have got yourself into." He puffed cheerfully at his cigarette. "My dear boy," Le Chiffre spoke like a father, "the game of Red Indians is over, quite over. You have stumbled by mischance into a game for grown-ups, and you have already found it a painful experience." He suddenly dropped his bantering tone and looked at Bond sharply and venomously. "Where is the money?" Bond's bloodshot eyes looked emptily back at him. Again the upward jerk of the wrist, and again Bond's whole body writhed and contorted. Le Chiffre waited until Bond's eyes dully opened again. "Perhaps I should explain," said Le Chiffre. "I intend to continue attacking the sensitive parts of your body until you answer my question. If you continue to be obstinate, you will be tortured to the edge of madness, and then the girl will be brought in and we will set about her in front of you. If that is still not enough, you will both be painfully killed, and I shall reluctantly leave your bodies and make my way abroad to a comfortable house which is waiting for me. If you hand the money over, so much the better. If not, I shall shrug my shoulders and be on my way." He paused, and his wrist lifted slightly on his knee. Bond's flesh cringed as the cane's surface just touched him. "Well?" Bond closed his eyes and waited for the pain. Like a rattlesnake, the cane instrument leapt from the floor. It struck again and again, so that Bond screamed and his body jangled in the chair like a marionette. Through the red mist of pain, Bond thought of Vesper. He could imagine how she was being used by the two gunmen. Poor wretch to have been dragged into this. Le Chiffre was talking again. "Torture is a terrible thing," he was saying as he puffed at a fresh cigarette, "but it is a simple matter for the torturer, particularly when the patient," he smiled at the word, "is a man. With this simple instrument one can cause a man as much pain as is possible. It is not only the immediate agony, but also the thought that your manhood is being gradually destroyed, and that at the end, if you will not yield, you will no longer be a man. That, my dear Bond, is inevitable, unless you tell me where you hid the money." He poured some more coffee into the glass. Bond raised his head and spoke thickly. "Money no good to you." His voice was a laborious croak. "Police trace it to you." Exhausted by the effort, his head sank forward again. "Ah, my dear fellow, I had forgotten to tell you." Le Chiffre smiled wolfishly. "We met after our little game at the casino, and you are such a sportsman that you agreed we would have one more run through the pack between the two of us. It was a gallant gesture, typical of an English gentleman. Unfortunately, you lost, and this upset you so much that you decided to leave Royale immediately for an unknown destination. Like the gentleman you are, you very kindly gave me a note explaining the circumstances so that I would have no difficulty in cashing your check. You see, dear boy, everything has been thought of, and you need have no fears on my account." He chuckled fatly. So that was the score, thought Bond, with a final sinking of the heart. The unknown destination would be under the ground, or under the sea, or perhaps, more simply, under the crashed Bentley. Well, if he had to die anyway, he might as well try it the hard way. He had no hope that Mattis or Leiter would get to him in time, but at least there was a chance that they would catch up with Le Chiffre before he could get away. It was a choice of evils, but the longer Le Chiffre continued the torture, the more likely he would be revenged. Bond lifted his head and looked Le Chiffre in the eyes. The china of the whites was now veined with red. The upward edges of black coffee at the corners of the mouth gave a false smile. "No," he said flatly. Le Chiffre grunted and set to work again with savage fury. Occasionally he snarled like a wild beast. After 10 minutes, Bond had fainted, blessedly. It was extraordinary to hear the third voice. Bond's dimmed senses hardly took it in. Then suddenly he was halfway back to consciousness. He found he could see and hear again. He could hear the dead silence after the one quiet word from the doorway. He could see Le Chiffre's head slowly come up, and the expression of blank astonishment, of innocent amazement, slowly give way to fear. "Stop," had said the voice, quietly. Bond heard slow steps approaching behind his chair. He tried desperately to read into Le Chiffre's face what was happening behind him, but all he saw was blind incomprehension and terror. His hands fluttered vaguely in his lap. His round, staring eyes had lowered for a split second, and Bond guessed there was a gun trained on him. There was a moment's silence. Smersh. The word came almost with a sigh. It came with a downward cadence, as if nothing else had to be said. It was the final explanation, the last word of all. "No," said Le Chiffre. "No, I—" His voice tailed off. Perhaps he was going to explain, to apologize, but what he must have seen in the other's face made it all useless. "Your 2 men, both dead. You are a fool and a thief and a traitor. I have been sent from the Soviet Union to eliminate you. We cannot see the end of the trouble you have caused. Do you plead guilty?" Bond wrestled with his consciousness. He screwed up his eyes and tried to shake his head to clear it, but his whole nervous system was numbed and no message was transmitted to his muscles. He could just keep his focus on the great pale face in front of him and on its bulging eyes. A thin string of saliva crept from the open mouth and hung down from the chin. "Yes," said the mouth. There was a sharp phut, no louder than a bubble of air escaping from a tube of toothpaste. No other noise at all, and suddenly Le Chiffre had grown another eye, right where the thick nose started to jut out below the forehead. It was a small black eye, without eyelashes or eyebrows. For a second the 3 eyes looked out across the room. Then the heavy head fell sideways, and finally the whole upper part of the body lurched over the arm of the chair. There was a short rattle of heels on the ground, and then no other movement. A hand came from behind Bond and grasped his chin and pulled it back. For a moment Bond looked up into 2 glittering eyes behind a narrow black mask. There was the impression of a crag-like face under a hat brim. He could take in nothing more before his head was pushed down again. "You are fortunate," said the voice. "I have no orders to kill you. Your life has been saved twice in one day. But you can tell your organization that Smersh is only merciful by chance or by mistake. I shall leave you my visiting card. You are a gambler. One day perhaps you will play against one of us. It would be well that you should be known as a spy." There was the click of a knife opening. An arm in some grey material came into Bond's line of vision. A broad, hairy hand emerging from a dirty white shirt cuff was holding a thin stiletto like a fountain pen. It poised for a moment above the back of Bond's right hand. Then the point of the stiletto executed 3 quick, straight slashes. A 4th slash crossed them where they ended, just short of the knuckles. Blood in the shape of an inverted M welled out and slowly started to drip onto the floor. The pain was nothing to what Bond was already suffering, but it was enough to plunge him again into unconsciousness. The steps moved quietly away across the room. The door was softly closed.